Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. My name is Joe Bradford. I'm here to talk to you about an issue that I was asked about recently and I want to give some clarification about. And that is the issue of, can a Muslim convert, inherit from their non-Muslim relative? In this video, we're going to talk about three main issues. Number one is the texts that are used to justify either position. Secondly, we're going to talk about the concept of inheritance versus a testamentary gift. And then thirdly, we're going to talk about the concept of preservation of wealth or value and the appropriate use of that wealth and value. Now, before that, I'd like to simply give you a prelude and to say the use of the word convert in this title was essentially a use for word choice and ease of search results. It was, I do not want to get into this issue of convert versus revert. I think this is one of the dumbest discussions that happens every time we talk about something that has to do with those who have accepted Islam, which is personally the term that I prefer. But for ease of search, and so people can find this, they're going to search convert or revert or something with vert in it. I don't care. Levert, doesn't matter. Don't inundate the comments with, you should have said this, you should have said that, the correct term is this, the correct term is that. It's completely semantics. Nothing existed at the time of the Prophet ﷺ of convert or revert or anything else. It was alladhina aslamu, those who had accepted Islam. But we are sometimes dictated to use terms so that they can be found easily by those who have skin in the game, those who have accepted Islam. And I find that this whole convert revert business is overtaken by those who, quite frankly, are neither converts nor reverts, nor have any skin in the game. Please don't bother. It really doesn't matter, to tell you the truth. Okay, so what is the issue here? The issue here is, if a Muslim has a non-Muslim relative who is dying or has died, may they take their inheritance that was left for them? And this necessitates that we talk about three issues. Number one is the prohibition or the lack thereof of inheriting, note the word inheritance, from a non-Muslim. Number two is the permissibility of taking a testamentary gift versus inheritance from a non-Muslim. And then lastly is the idea of istinqadh al-amwal, or the appropriate preservation of wealth and or value. So number one, the general consensus of scholars is that it is not permissible to inherit from a non-Muslim, nor a non-Muslim from a Muslim. لا يرث المسلم الكافر ولا الكافر المسلم. This hadith is muttafaqun alayhi. It is narrated in both Bukhari and Muslim, and the official position of all four madhahib, as well as the jamhur, the vast majority of scholars, is that this is the case. There are, however, situations within Islamic history in which scholars differed with this opinion in very strict circumstances. So we find, for example, Muawiyah radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, may Allah be pleased with him and his father, and we find Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, may Allah be pleased with him, that they had opined that it was permissible for a Muslim to inherit from a non-Muslim. Now, their permitting this can be carried in one of two ways. Either that they are not applying the hadith that we mentioned to situations in which Muslims and Christians are living peacefully with each other, and they are simply looking at the flow of funds and the power dynamic, or secondly, that they didn't know the hadith that we mentioned earlier, and therefore they applied an analogy. And some scholars have mentioned, such as Ibn Rushd in his Bidayat al-Mujtahid, that the analogy that they made was the marriage of non-Muslim women. It is permissible to marry Christian and Jewish women, where it is not permissible for Christian and Jewish men to marry Muslim women. So this shows that there can be an offset between the two, and that the primacy is given to the idea of Islam and the empowerment of Islam, through allowing the Muslim to inherit from his non-Muslim relative. Now, obviously, that is a qiyas, it is an analogy which flies in the face of the text. And it is therefore more likely that that was not the primary motivation for their allowing a non-Muslim to take, or I'm sorry, for allowing a Muslim to take the wealth left behind by their non-Muslim relative, but instead something else was going. Now, you might say, well, that was two of the Sahaba. Who else held this opinion? Well, Sa'id ibn Musayyib, radiallahu anhu, and Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah, rahimahullah, wa radiya anhu, Muhammad ibn Hassan ibn Hussein, and others from amongst the Tabi'een had taken this opinion. And they also mention certain analogies to the idea of manslaughter and murder when it happens in the context of pluralistic societies where Muslims and non-Muslims have the same rights as and to those in which they are in a state of war. So if you are in a state of war, then the inheritance or the parity between the civic rights does not apply. And when you are in a state where you are in a state of peace, then the parity between civic rights applies. That said, that is categorical. Now, there's another hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ said, "La wasiyyata liwarith." There is no testamentary gift given to an inheritor. What does that mean? That means that if I were to die, and I am allowed, because of the hadith of Sa'id ibn Abi Waqqas, that the Prophet ﷺ said, "Ath-thuluthu wa-thuluthu kathir," a third and a third is still much. I may give, as a Muslim, I may give up to 1/3 of my total residual estate, meaning after I die, subtract my funeral expenses, subtract the debts that I owe to people. Let's say I had $10,000. I'm sorry, $100,000. I owe $10,000 in debt. I owe $10,000 for my funeral costs. I now have $7,000 or $8,000 left over. I can now give away 1/3 of that $80,000. I said 8,000. That's wrong. I can give away 1/3 of that $80,000 in charity to individuals, or to I can give it away to individuals or to organizations or to causes which are charitable. And so I can give away about $26,000 of that $80,000. And then whatever's left after that $26,000, that would then go to and be distributed amongst my inheritors. Is it permissible for me as a Muslim to give away portion of that 1/3 to a non-Muslim? Yes, it is. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ said, "La wasiyyata liwarith." There is no testamentary gift to an inheritor, which means that if a person is officially not an inheritor, they may by default take a testamentary gift. So if you are prohibited from inheriting to or from your non-Muslim relative or friend or whoever it may be, meaning you're giving them a stipulated portion from the percentages mentioned or the residuals mentioned in the Qur'an, then by default, they may receive part of that 1/3 of your testamentary or charitable gifting from your will. And that's a very important point for you that are writing your wills. You're going to want to understand that if you have people who don't generally inherit from you, whether they be Muslim or non-Muslim, whether they are close to you or not, then it is recommended to give them something from that testamentary gift, that up to 1/3 of your entire estate, so as to honor them. So, for example, you have a stepchild that doesn't necessarily inherit from you, give them from you. You have a non-Muslim relative you're very close to, especially your mother or your father, your brothers or your sisters that you're very close to, then you should write that in there for them. But that's not the issue here. The issue is if a non-Muslim puts you in their will, are you allowed to take that money that they leave you? And the answer is yes. And this is based on the understanding of this hadith. La wasiyyata liwarith. There is no testamentary gift for an inheritor. So if you are precluded from being an inheritor from them, you can still take the gifts that they leave you. And so all wills at least here in the United States, are considered to be the testamentary gifts that are given from the estate of the person who is deceased. Why? Because there is no religiously dictated inheritance law. All right. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, is this precluded by the 1/3 that was dictated? No, that 1/3 is applicable to Muslims only. All right. Why? So that we don't disenfranchise any of those people that have been guaranteed their rights by the Qur'an. Okay, so number one, we talked about the idea of inheritance in general. Number two is that the idea of taking from the will of your non-Muslim relative is not an issue of inheritance. It is a testamentary gift. It is a gift that is given at the time of death, and therefore is not applicable. And lastly, if somebody says, well, still, I believe that 1/3 should only be given, right? Okay, so what do you do when you get more than 1/3? Or what do you do even if you were to disagree with the idea of this hadith being applicable? There's still an even broader principle in the Shari'ah, which is called istinqadul amwal, and that is the appropriate preservation of wealth. What do I mean by that? A man came to the Prophet ﷺ, and he said, sometimes we find stray camels in the desert. Can we take it? The Prophet ﷺ said, عندها ماءها وأكلها وحافرها ما لك وما لها. It has its ability to transport itself. It's carrying its own water, and it has its own food, meaning it grazes. What do you have to do with it? Meaning that this animal is going to take care of itself when it's lost in the desert because it's in its natural habitat. Then the person said, وَمَاذَا عَنْ وَأَمَّا ضَالَةُ الضَّأْنِ أو الشاة. What about lost sheep? الشاة والغنم. What about lost sheep? قال صلى الله عليه وسلم هي لك أو لغيرك أو للذئب. You're either going to take it for yourself, leave it for someone else, or it's going to be eaten by a wolf. Meaning that he was encouraging them to take a lost sheep so that the value of that sheep is preserved. Similarly, there's the idea of a luqata. A luqata is a specific chapter in fiqh wherein if you find a lost item, then you are not simply supposed to leave it on the ground. Right? So let's say I'm walking down the street and I find a purse. And the purse is full of jewelry and phones and personal items. I just leave it there? No, I pick it up. Let's say, for example, there's no phone or no ID card in there. I don't know whose it is. Then I take it. What do? I announce for 1 year that I found a lost purse in such and such area. Whoever has lost a purse, come and see me. Then, Shar'an, Islamically, you are supposed to ask them to describe that purse to you. And if they give you enough identifying information, then you can release that thing to them. Let's say they never come and claim it after a year. Then it is yours to keep and to use. What if it is a small amount, like a few dollars that you find on the ground? It's not even worth announcing at that time. So you can do one of two things. You either take it and use it, or take it and give it away in sadaqah. But it is not to be left behind. It's not to be left there. So building on this principle of istinqad al-amwal, of the proper use of left behind or lost wealth, ask yourself, is it better for me to leave this money that I am inheriting from my relative for someone who is irreligious, irresponsible, sinful, or even malicious to take? Or is it better for me to take and do one of two things with it? Spend on my family, or give it away in charity and do something good with it. So we can see, and we'll wrap up here, we can see that the idea of inheriting from a non-Muslim, number one, there is room for it in the classical opinions of the scholars of Islam, all the way back to the time of the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum. However, as I said, it is more likely that what they meant was that there was some room for taking that wealth either characterizing it as a gift. Number one, under the hadith, la wasiyata li warith, no testamentary gift for inheritor, the inverse of which meaning that a testamentary gift can be given to a non-inheritor. Or two, the idea of saving that money from waste and saving that money from willful misuse. And so that's the summary of the adillah that have to do with this issue. It's something that all Muslims that have non-Muslim relatives really need to think about. When your mother, your grandmother, your grandfather, your uncle, your father, somebody comes and says, honey, I want to put you on my will. What is it that you want? Don't go, oh, astaghfirullah, I can't take this money from you. You're a kafir. First of all, super rude. Second of all, super ignorant. So learn before you make those type of mistakes and you make your relatives feel as if they're not allowed to care for you. They're only going to name you in their will because they care for you and they want to do something good for you. Maybe they want to empower you because they like how much you've changed and how better of a person you are. But you're never going to do that if you take very shallow readings of the Shari'ah and you do off-putting things to them. So remember, maintain your composure, maintain your character. Don't say things unless you know them, and research the issue. And then even if you disagree with me in this video, which is completely fine, when you go and talk to your relatives, don't be off-putting. Don't do things or say things to them that are going to make them feel as if they're bad for wanting to care for you after they're gone. You need to do something that is what they call tatyib al-khatir. Just give them a good opinion of what they're doing that is good, and a good opinion of caring for you, because that care that you show them in that moment will reflect for years to come. So that's all I have to say for you, say about this issue to you this evening. I hope that it was beneficial. If I said anything correct, it's from Allah alone. If I said anything incorrect, it's from me and from Shaitan. Jazakumullahu khairan. I hope to be doing more of these videos soon now that my voice is better. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. See you all next time.